Good morning or evening, folks, depending on where you are. These morning shows for me, evening, depending on they always get confusing for my little brain dealing with time zones. But anyway, welcome back to World War II TV. If you are catching a live show because it is an unusual time of day, well, welcome to the channel. All the information you will always need is in the description below. So you'll find links to my guests' books, their websites, social media accounts where you can buy merchandise from World War II TV, etc., etc. And if you enjoy what we're doing, please consider becoming either a patron or a YouTube channel member. And at the very least, click that subscribe button so that you get notifications about our future shows. But anyway, joining me again today is Peter Cox from New Zealand, who has written about extensively his father's time as a machine gunner in World War II. Today, Peter will be taking us through his father's journey and the battles through Greece in 1941. The previous show Peter was on, we were talking about his father in North Africa, Sidi Rezak, but today we're off to Greece. So I will bring Peter in now. So good evening where you are, Peter. How are you today?
Yeah, fine, thanks, Paul. Nice to see you again.
And you indeed. So since I last saw you, been up to anything research-wise, or does the work continue looking at your father's story?
Well, I've been fielding quite a few queries on Sidi Rezak and other bits and pieces, but there's always a few projects to have a look at. I'm looking at a war correspondent at the moment, just as a something different.
And it's always these things never get finished. You know, when people who write the books on it, it's only just that you have to get a book out, not that you've finished the research. It just goes on and on and on. But anyway, this Greek campaign, which we'll get into, what's fascinating about to me is that I find that most people don't know anything about it unless they had a relative who was there or they have some kind of lineage with a regiment or unit was there. Greece in 1941 seems to just pass most people by, but it is a really fascinating campaign. But you've got a massive great PowerPoint that I'm in charge of today, which will take us through. We've also got some video clips, folks. Now I'm assuming folks, that there won't be many questions that you'll have because this is a personal journey we're following today rather than a meat and potatoes study of the campaign. We're not necessarily looking at who did well and what the leadership was about. We're about one man's experience in it. But over to you, Peter, to take us through. But if you do have questions, of course, do fire away and we will try and address them. But over to you, Peter, to take us through this.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Just put the first photo, if you wouldn't mind. Yeah, so this is just a bit of a collection of my father's memorabilia that I thought we'd use to kick it off with. But as you said, this is really a continuation of our journey that my wife and I, starting in Cairo, went over to Brook. Then we headed back to Alexandria and up to Greece. So it's the Greece section that we're going to do now. It was great that our daughter could join us for that one because she majored in linguistics and
nice.
Up there. Paul, just keep the ear. So anyone that saw the Sidi Rezak program will know that's the iconic photo of that campaign, and so that was really our starting point. And so the next photo, Paul, please, is really the next gun pit that we wanted to go and track down, and this was one of my father and his team in central Greece. So that we're going to retrace the steps as far as we can with as much authenticity as I was able to organise, and we've got some maps which I'll talk about, diaries, photos, and all the rest of it. So one of the things that really interested us when we were travelling around is how did they find their way around there? Because we struggled, and having done 3 or 4 laps of Katerini without being able to find our way out of it, it's generated a conversation. So how did they get on in their day? About a month or so ago, I had a call from a friend of mine. His father was in the New Zealand Divisional Cavalry and actually wrote the official history of it. And he said, I've just found some of my father's photos. Would you be interested to have a look at them? So his maps, sorry. So we went and saw him, and he ended up with a pile of about 20 or 30 maps. So if you want authenticity, Paul, this is just one of them, and you can't see the detail of it, but not only are these maps or the campaign, but they are the maps that the Div Cav used. So these are the ones that they had in their truck as they were driving around Greece, and we're looking at some of the markups on them. So that was part of it, which was really interesting. But the other one was that I came across, there's a book by Brigadier George Clifton called The Happy Hunted, which is a really good yarn. but in it I noticed there was a quote in about Greece, and it said that we were still using the Greek Automobile Association red and yellow road map, which had guided us up Greece. It did give us a slight clue, whereas most people had long since run off any official maps issued. So it sounds a bit Dad's Army, doesn't it? You know, here we are after war, and we've got our AA maps to go with. So I said I've got photos from my father's collection, and of that one that you showed before, that is the original of it, just to show you the size and scale of what these photos were like. And whether he took them or not, I don't think he did. I think it was one of his other platoon members. So just moving on to the diary photo, yeah. So this is that's the second edition, I think, of the diary. The first one is in this little notebook, which I think he wrote at the time, and this one he wrote in Egypt, I think, after the campaign. And you'll notice there it's got "not for publication" written on it so many times, which still gives me a slight twinge of conscience about the way that I've been using this. But so many of his mates told me their stories, and I tested them about how would my father feel about this, and they were very relaxed about it. There's actually nothing in it, but I know why they did that, because they weren't meant to be having diaries. So anyhow, that's the core of what I'll be talking about. But I've also got their company war diary and a few other bits and pieces too. So just to get it cracking, this is he joined up pretty much straight after war was declared. He's second from the left. That's part of his group up in at their camp in Burnham. And he'd been a territorial before the war. He's 23-year-old, and went away with the first group of New Zealanders, what they called the first echelon, of 1/3 of the New Zealand division, and arrived in Egypt in February 1940. So I just quickly, can we just run through the next ones just quite quickly, Paul, if you don't mind? I just want to introduce some of his mates, because they are really key to the story. It's my father, obviously, on the left. His good mate, Cecil Dodson, Doddy, in the middle. I met Doddy. He was really helpful for me. You'll notice, I'm just going to show you these two badges, because if we can hone in on those somehow. You'll see the old and the new. So that when they formed the battalion, they used the old crisscross guns, and then they went on to the Universal Onward badge in 1941. I had Doddy on about that, because he's the only one that's wearing the machine gun badge, and he said, well, he put off looking at that bit of paper for as long as he could. So the next one, please, Paul, is in the middle is my friend Phil Hammond, that if anyone that saw City Resieg will remember. He was the shining light, as far as I was concerned, with all the detail and information that he could provide about the campaign. The other two fellows will also come across, Bill Andrew and Ginty McNeil. So their time in Cairo was actually all about weapons training, and I just want to talk about the lead up to the campaign. For the machine gunners, a lot of that was fitness and weapons proficiency. And being the machine gunners, it's my father on the left there with a pick over his shoulder, they had a lot of kit to carry, and I'll cover that again a bit further on. Paul, the next one is...
And just while we got that photo on, it's worth mentioning, of course, that photo could have been taken 40 years earlier, because, I mean, the machine gun technology hadn't really moved on much since the late 19th century. In the earlier photos, they were wearing 08 pattern belts, 4-pocket tunics. That you can see that there hasn't really been much in the way of modernization in the machine gun course since
using the World War I. Yeah, using the World War I uniforms, as you mentioned. And just going on to that, so this was taken on during a route march in April 1940, and they did 18 miles in temperatures of over 100 degrees, carrying all their kit and in those old uniforms. And I was thinking about that, because at that age I was running marathons, and doing 18 miles carrying all that kit with gear that would be chafing hugely, with minimal water, and they knew very little about hydration, and army boots. They must have been seriously hard men to cope with that sort of stuff, I think. So, and just the next couple, Paul, again, we can whip over fairly quickly, but just showing some of the terrain and the gear that these fellows were training with, so that they really put the hammer down for those first. The next one too, Paul. These are just I think it's the Gebel Mokatam at the back of the camp at Mardi. Some of the gear that they were carrying and the terrain they were carrying it over. By the time they sort of headed to the Western Desert in around about September, they were pretty fit. They were consistently doing, their 20-mile marches and carrying all that gear. And so each of the machine gunners was carrying about 20 kilos of gear, either a tripod, a barrel and water, or ammunition. So, and that was on top of their own personal kit.
Wow.
So yeah, heavy duty stuff. So then they headed to the Western Desert. This is just, again, showing the route marching and also the dust, which must have caused them an equal amount of discomfort. And the next one, Paul, I'm whipping through these quite quickly because it's really just try and set the scene for the hard yard that they had to do to get ready and acclimatized for the rigours of lugging machine guns around and moving positions. So this was a fairly bleary-eyed looking group on Boxing Day, for their Boxing Day march. And the last one, finally, is the guys had a minimal involvement in the first Libyan campaign, and that's one of the platoon, the fellow Bill Verdon, we'll come across him again shortly, modelling some of the Italian gear that they had collected. And that the water barrel there, actually they carried right around the rest of the desert campaign with them. So I think we'll just move on, Paul. If anyone's got any questions, if they want to go to my website, cityrezeeg.co.nz, there's an email link there. I'm very happy to respond.
And I should just add that watching us today is my old mate Rich from the Vickers Machine Gun Collection Research Association. So if you've got any specific questions about machine guns, the Vickers particularly, head over to Rich's website as well. And Rich, I know, is fascinated by those kit photos you've got and the variety of 08 pattern webbing, 37 pattern webbing, headgear, uniforms, jumpers, trousers, puttees, gaiters, leather equipment, canvas equipment. So there's all sorts of rabbit holes we could go down with just the kit alone. So there's Rich and there's Peter's resources there if you're interested in all this kind of stuff. So, but back to you, Peter.
Just while we're on that, Paul, there is one other thing I've got here, which you probably can't read, but it's their range table with the waterfall chart for setting the guns for indirect shoot. Anyhow, but yeah, happy to hear. But I think technical stuff on the Vickers, the other gentleman, sounds far more eminently qualified than me.
He's got about 37 of them in his living room, so yeah. He'll probably say, no, it's 38, but yeah.
I've met that type before. So I don't really want to get into the background of the Greek campaign, but very briefly, people will know Italy invaded Greece in 1940 and got their kicked back into Albania. Britain had committed to help Greece if they had been attacked. Germany was looking at its interests in the Balkan, and there was all sorts of military and political things that were getting mixed up with each other and sometimes in conflict. And then there was also the issue of maintaining a presence in North Africa with Wavell's forces and what was going to happen there. And I love this quote about there was a meeting of the heavyweights in Cairo in March 1940. Wavell, Anthony Eden, Dill and Admiral Cunningham. And one account said, in what is today called groupthink, a dangerous unanimity emerged in support of the Greek adventure. But it seemed as though afterwards, or Cunningham said, I gave this my opinion, though politically we were correct, I had grave uncertainty as the military expedients, as did Dill. Freiberg put it more bluntly, so we muddled into the Greek campaign. It was a campaign entered into for political reasons and came near to losing us the Middle East. And of course, the disparity between the forces was astronomical. I think, again, depending on whose figures you use, the British, Australian, New Zealand, and a few other entities there too, about 65,000 and 80 tanks, 80 or 100 aircraft. The Germans about 700 men and about 700 planes, depending on whose numbers you use. But whichever way you look at it, you sort of look at it and say, well, how did that ever happen? Oh dear.
It's a oft overlooked campaign, and the numbers were not huge, but significant for those who were there.
I'm just losing you. You there, Paul?
I'm still there. Yeah, you've got me.
Okay. Can you see me?
Yep, still got you. Yep, everything's good.
I can't see you or anything. That's all.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I'll just keep going then. I would have no idea how to get back from this, unfortunately, with my.
Do you want to leave and come back in again? Maybe that'll work. We love a technical hitch, folks. But well, yeah, we can definitely see and we can definitely hear you. So
okay, well, look, let's keep going, but you'll just have to acknowledge the fact that I'm working blind, so I can't see what you're doing. I do have the photos on a different screen, so.
We've still got the map up right now. Then I'll put the one up with the road signs.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So yeah. Well, I don't think we need to follow too much the New Zealand preparation. I think they had real difficulties getting the division together, but they eventually got there, and they disappeared off to Greece about March. So from our point of view, we picked up our journey, as I said, at City Rezique. We did, so you can just truck over the next three photos, which will take you through, or the fourth photo, which will take you to Alexandria. And that's really just showing what the difference between the terrain that they were going to encounter up in Greece. So the next one, Paul, if we can go to the map, if you've got the one with the arrows on it. So
Yugoslav at the top, red arrows. Yep,
yeah, this one. So I'll pick up Brian's first entry. Earlier this year, we came back to Helwan, which was one of the New Zealand camps, and then we knew we were in for a shift, but no one knew where. However, we took on a special course of training, which gave us a pretty good idea. And then the first week in March, we got some new kit, and then we moved to a new area, which was near Alexandria. So just a quick overview of the chronology of the campaign. They arrived in Athens on the 19th of March and departed on the 25th. So they had about a week in Athens. And then they went right up to the north to that top arrow, which is a little village, which I'm going to call McClymont because that's what he called it, but whether that's the correct pronunciation, I have reservations. And then Germany declared war on Greece on the 6th of April. So the 10th of April, they spent 10 days up in McClymont preparing these defensive positions, and then they started heading south. So they left there on the 10th of April, and they arrived around, they went over what they call the Olympus Pass, which is the second arrow, and then to the Elefthero, I'm not going to try and get that junction name right, but that big junction name, and then down to Allison on the 14th of April. And the next step was down to Molos, which is quite about halfway down there. And then on the 25th of April and 26th of April, they went back to Portarafti, just southeast of Athens, and they were back in Alexandria on the 29th of April. So things moved pretty quickly. God, it's a nuisance not being able to see this thing.
So what you can see me, you can't see anything. You've got.
No, it's just dropped off. And it says, thanks for downloading. Now just a few steps left. But
maybe try leaving and joining it again. It'd be easier if you can see what we're looking at. You try leaving, and I'll hold the fort without you, and you come back into the program.
When you say, yeah, okay.
So just leave the stream and then rejoin it.
Okay.
We'll try that.
Right. You've got the most untechy person you could.
No, I'll drop you from my end, and then rejoin in. Okay, I'll drop you from my end. So I'll see you in a minute. Right. So it's just me, folks. So while we're waiting for Peter to come back, I'll just remind you that I am taking a bit of a break from streaming through the rest of March, early April, because I'm going to San Diego next week for the Society of Military History Conference, and then I've got a week-long tour. Some of you who are regular viewers will be joining me on that tour. Me and Mag are taking people around the sites of Normandy. There's still places left on the October one. If you want to do that, contact me there. And then things pick up again in mid-April when we're talking about the Balkans. We've got a week about the Balkans. We've got an artillery week coming up, etc., etc. But for the next 2 or 3 weeks, shows will be sparse on the ground, except for the one we have later today with Ellen Hampton about the doctors in France. So we will have a show tonight. Then there's a bit of a gap, but I am planning things for the future, and it is lots of stuff coming up later in the year. But I just want to remind you that we've got a bit of a slack time for a couple of weeks for you now. But anyway, I'll put the PowerPoint back up, and we'll show those kit photos again while we're waiting for Peter to come back, because I found them really interesting. Because there's bits of 08 pattern gear there, there's 1937 pattern gear, there's leather stuff, there's canvas stuff, there's a real hodgepodge of stuff there. And when Rich was over from the Vickers Machine Gun Association Normandy last year, we were talking about machine guns in Normandy. We're thinking about universal carriers taking most things around all the time, certainly trucks and things. And thinking about these guys carrying stuff on their backs over the desert and then going to Greece is really, really pretty amazing. It's astonishing just how physically fit these guys had to be. And again, as Peter said, in addition to their own kit, they're having to carry as well. So having played around with Vickers machine guns a little bit, not as much as Rich does, carrying these things in the temperatures these guys were doing, it's absolutely extraordinary. Looks like Peter's back. So I will bring him in, and
that's better.
There we are. Can you see me again, Peter?
Yep.
Good, super. I was just filling in without you, talking about what we got coming up, so it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So right. Okay. So I off to Alexandria and on the boat. What I find interesting about this next bit of text, the diary, was just their level of enthusiasm and their lack of apprehension for heading off to their big adventure. So just to get a tenor for what they were feeling about it at this time. At 10 a.m., this is the 18th of March, 10 a.m. we marched down to the station. What a crush there was on the train. One couldn't move for kit bags, packs, webs, rifles, etc. I was jolly pleased when we got to the wharf at 3 o'clock and went aboard HMS Gloucester. There we waited impatiently and eagerly for our departure. There are about 12,000 troops on board, plus 700 sailors. So you can imagine what a crush there is. The troops consist of Aussies who have just come back from Benghazi and NZers who are all looking forward to a change of country. The sailors are fine fellows. They can't seem to do enough for the boys, especially our fellows. They gave up their blankets, hammocks, and even coats so the lads could have a sleep. The weather was beautiful and calm with a slight breeze. During the night, we slipped along at 33 knots, changed down to 29 knots during the day, played cards all night, and everywhere one looked, soldiers lay stretched out. On the boat, there was a message from Freiburg. It was the only time he could get a message out to the whole division, just saying that he'd never seen troops that have impressed him more. You can shoot and you can march long distance without fatigue. Do not be caught unprepared, and war conditions will always be difficult, but you've trained physically, and you must steel yourselves to overcome the ordeal of the modern battlefield. So there was some excitement on the way. As he said, at dinner time, we passed a convoy escorted by warships. An enemy bomber passed over us and dropped 3 bombs just astern of us. There are 3 near misses, the nearest one falling about 20 yards astern. None of the lads seemed to worry very much, but it was a great sight to see the sailors go into action. So then they arrived in Piraeus, and if you just move to the next photo, Paul, please.
Yep.
So this is actually the Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery at Phaleron, just by Piraeus. That's the reason for that photo. We pulled in about 4:15 after a wonderful trip. The crew were great chaps. They waited on us hand and foot and wanted for nothing. They're good fellows, and I'm proud to know them all. The next one, please, Paul, was they going through Athens. The people of Athens and Piraeus gave us a great welcome. The Aussies marched through town and people lined both sides and clapped and cheered them as they went through. They even turned out again as we went by in our trucks. It gives one a grand feeling to know that we are so welcome. Paul, this photo and any that have that narration are actually some out of some of the New Zealand official histories. Mm-hmm. So just acknowledge the Ministry of Culture and Heritage for letting me use those. Brilliant. So the next one, Paul, is this is one of the maps that I inherited. An interesting one, this, because it's this part of the map was actually based around some German archaeological maps and street maps of Athens from 1925. So the two arrows there are really just showing the two camps of where the Kiwis were camped up for the time. The first one, the bottom one, at Mount Hymettus, and the other one at Kephissia. So you can just go to the next photo, please, Paul, which is the Hymettus camp, where they arrived and are quite close to Athens. It's great to be camped under trees and on real grass. The first most of us have seen for over 12 months. What a wonderful change after Egypt. So they did do a bit of sightseeing, and I'm just going to do a little quote out of the Olivia Manning's Balkans trilogy. I don't know if you know that. It's a series of 3 books set in Athens at that time, and her character Harriet is going to a Nafi concert, and she said soldiers were filling the front rows. There were not many British soldiers left in Attica. There were the New Zealanders, tall, sunburnt men who seemed to maintain their seriousness like a reserve of power. Imagining their remote, peaceful islands, Harriet wondered what had brought the New Zealanders to Europe. What quarrel had they here? They seemed to her the most inoffensive of men. Why had they come all this way to die? So it's just an interesting perspective. Paul, there's now 5 groups of then and nows, which we did in Athens, which I was very keen to really stand in my father's footsteps. So you can go through these pretty quickly. This one is obviously the, and that's me. And these are all just views of Athens. I found these fascinating because if you've got time and you can actually dig in and identify the same buildings being there, which is the sort of thing I quite like. And that's Mount Hymettus where they camped. It's in the one on the background, and that they were camped up on that hillside there. And this was the Olympic Games venue of 1896 and 2004. The 2004, they used part of it for the 2004 Olympics. And I just slipped in this next photo, Paul, just of my father. This was him in 1937. So you can see he was in those days. He was a pretty fit critter, actually, and he's a very good athlete. And the next one is just some of the lads, including my father, after a night out. And Bill Verdon's on this, my father's in the middle, Bill on his to his left. Last night we went on leave to Athens, he said, and had a great time. Even bought beer and pint mugs. Crikey, they nearly drowned us when downing them. After breakfast, left Hymettus for the new camp. What a great hand we got from the people. They rushed out with flowers, cigarettes, etc., and generally made a great fuss of us. What impresses me most is the way we're treated everywhere we go. People can't seem to be able to do enough for us. So we've got a series of photos which of heading up to the front, which I've tried to fit around some of his photos. So this is just on their way out of Athens and drinking wine on the way up to the front. His next description was beautiful green fields, forest-covered hills, and snow-covered towering ranges on either side of us. Then the next one farmland, large landscape patchwork stretched for miles in front of us. And there's then some villages and just the next three, Paul, if you don't mind. Okay, so these first two are a couple of convoys, the photos of their convoy. And the third one is just for authenticity. We thought we should get into a military convoy too, and there happened to be one passing, so we joined in. So this is diary quote: "We moved once more, the country being very similar to what we've been through." And they went through Larissa and saw the earthquake damage. We also passed through beside Platoon Castle, which was a significant point in the battle. And the next one is just a more contemporary photo of that there. Then the next 3 or 4 photos, I'm just trying to get everyone up to the front, Paul, and we're not very far away. So we've got the going up over the Olympus Pass, which is that one between Allison and Caterini. That's a contemporary photo, and this is one. The next one is basically the same place. And I think you can just rattle through the next 3 or 4, and that again, this is, and the next one's a contemporary view of that.
There we go. Yeah. Yeah, great photos, by the way. Wonderful stuff.
So they got through to Caterini. So now they're up in the Gulf of Salonika, and this is one of those Div Kiev maps. So the red arrows, the over on the top right is Salonika or Thessalonica. The second one, pointing to the left, is the Aleakman River, because that's where that was one of the, effectively the front line that they were doing their defences for. The third one coming down is McClymont, the village where they were staying, and Caterini at the bottom. The yellow arrows are where the Div Cav positions are. And if you go to the next one, Paul, so this is a blow up of it, and it's not easy to see, but the 3 yellow arrows on the left are marking the Div Cav squadrons, with the A at the top, B on the left, and C squadron on the right. And the 2 arrows, yellow arrows that are pointing to the left, they've actually marked 2 bridges for demolition. That's what those ones are. And the red arrows down the bottom are where the machine gunners were based. So the McClymont is the one on the village on the coast, and Svendami, it was the ridge between those 2, which was where they were based. And the next map actually gives us a little bit more detail. So that they were there with New Zealand 6th Brigade, which was the 3 battalions on the coastal side there. 4 Brigade was slightly inside that, and right down the bottom was 5th Brigade. This was a little bit later on, but it just gives the demonstration of where we were there. And those Div Cav positions, again, you can see them up in the front there, at the top there.
Yeah.
So they were there. They were on the coast there for 10 days, and it was a really important part of their time in Greece, actually, because they were engaging with the villages and really getting to grips with themselves as a team and building the defensive positions. So can we run that first video, if you don't mind? And this is a bit AMCAM, but this can do stuff that that I can't really. It's hard to articulate. So what Brian was saying is, this is the first time for over a week I've had a chance to do a spot of writing. We've had several changes of campsites. We're now situated on the edge of a village, right on the seashore. It's very pretty around here. Fruit trees of various kinds are all around us, while all day long people in the vicinity till the soil between the various rows of trees. It's very quiet, no cars, very few trains, and only a few rattling bullock carts and braying donkeys break the quietness. For the past few days, we've been very busy on our positions, and we should make ourselves presence felt when the time comes. Early this morning, concentrated bombing took place. That was over in Salonika. Somebody across the way was getting donko by the sound of things. It's a wonderful area where we're camped. The people of the village make us more than welcome. We've made friends with some great kids. They fill all our water containers and they're around every day to fill our water bottles while we're working. One can't help liking them. We certainly appreciate this place after Helwan. Now, this last part is really the key part of the village, because according to Phil Hammond, who saw these videos with me, he said that's where we were, or if it wasn't there, it was exactly like that.
Right.
So up on a ridge, the edge of a village, looking out towards the Allison River, building their defensive positions. So, yeah, that's about it, I think.
Yeah.
Right,
and we got a question from a couple of viewers. Ian Carl was asking, what time of year were you in Greece for these photos?
Yeah, really
very green.
Question. Really good question. Exactly the same time as they were. Right. Exactly the same time. We were there in April, and in one or two of these places, we were in the same place, same time of the year.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So that made it extra special, I'd have to say. So they were on the ridge, and this is, I thought someone may not have seen it, what a war diary looks like, and they're all different. But this is an actual page of the war diary of the 3 Company, and that down the bottom it says number 9 Platoon, detailed to maintain observation on the coast to ensure that the enemy did not use boats on the sea coast. So that's really what some of this my stuff is based on. So come the 8th of April, things were starting to warm up. The Germans had started invaded, and the Div Cav were now blowing those bridges that we looked at over the Allison River. But it was also starting to hot up a little bit where the men were. So on the 8th of April, I said, this morning was a very bad one. We went out to some of our diggings. Oh, could you go to the next one, Paul, please? Because it'll take you to that. Oh, sorry.
I think these are just the ones of the stills of the village, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. So go run through them all, and then we'll get back to that, the field again.
Here we are.
Yeah. Thank you. We went out to some of our diggings. So this is the area that we're looking at. And a few minutes after we got there, some of the boys picked up a time bomb or something, and poor old Bill Verdon was looking at it when it went off. It blew both his hands off and put a hole in his side. He took it wonderfully well, and he was conscious all the time. Bill deserved much better luck. Home sweet home for him now. Arthur Green, our officer, also had his leg and neck filled with shrapnel. It sort of spoiled our Sunday off. I only hope I can take it as well when my turn happens to come along. And the next day, 9th of April, early today, the Major came over with the sad news that Bill Verdon passed away yesterday morning. Several of us got leave to go to Katerini for his funeral, and we went down there for the ceremony. We arrived down there too late, and in fact, we arrived just as the last post was sounded. I feel sorry for his family, as Bill was a real good lad and deserved much better luck. So, yeah, the reason I showed the photo of the railway station there was they worked out later that there was a lot of 5th column activity going on in the area, and it was the station master of the railway station that was actually the kingpin there, and he appeared actually while they were there. Interesting. So 2 days after this, or actually the next day, the 10th of April, they started withdrawing, even though they'd had no contact with the enemy at all. So if you could just go to the next map, please, Paul. So this is the same map we had before, but it just shows the first part of their withdrawal back through the mountains, which we're going to spend a bit of time on. So they started off on the coast up the top there, went back through Katerini, and then over that one right at the bottom left, the Olympus Pass. So the 5th Brigade was back there. That's the 2 battalions of the 5th Brigade provided effectively the other 2 brigades went through that rear guard and over the pass. So yes, so again, this is one of the Div Cav maps, and I'm sorry I'm rushing this, but and I'm sorry that the detail will be a bit hard to follow. But if I can just run from north south so that you can get a total picture of it. The top arrow is on the coast where they started. Then the second arrow down is Katerini. The third one, towards the centre of the map, is a village called Agios Dimitrios, which is on the Olympus Pass. Then the orange arrow is where the Div Cav had positions marked out, because coming down from the other side is the other main road which goes to the northwest. So you had these two roads converging, the northwest and the northeast, at the Elefthero-Korian junction, he says confidently, and then down to Allison, just below that. And then the last bottom one on there, you see that at Allison, the road goes in two directions, round almost in a heart shape. They were over on the left-hand side of that, where that last arrow is.
And what's the distance are we talking about from the top arrow to the bottom arrow?
Well, we did it in even going around Katerini about four or five times. We went from there to Larissa, which is right at the bottom, easily in a day.
Okay.
Easily in a day.
Right.
Yeah, and that's with stops on the way. Yeah. So the New Zealanders got quite... this whole Olympus thing seemed to really get at them. You know, I think they felt something about the history of Greece and you know, the mood around there of the mountains, which reminded them home and all the rest of it. So this was the reason I've got this on, is it's one of the New Zealand campaign. It was done in the 1940s. It was a pretty contemporary one, but you see it's got Olympus on there and the machine gunners, which I quite liked it. So they started withdrawing, and what I've got now, Paul, I think, is I just want to run over, before you do that, can we play the second video?
Yep.
So this is going up over the Olympus Pass, and I'm going to read my father's diary, and also some quotes from George Clifton, who was the colonel of the New Zealand Engineers. So my father's diary said, "We got our shift all right, but it was in the wrong directions. The Yugos broke in the south, and the Germans came right through and took Salonika the other day. We were in the front line as we were in the rear guard while the forward troops came back. However, we didn't need to go into action. No sign of Jerry was seen. At 5 p.m. last night, we retired over the pass from McClymont. On the pass itself, which is what I'm looking at here, it rained and hailed, and everyone and everything got wet to the skin. The further we went up, the more dense the weather got. However, we got over by 10 p.m. after a very interesting ride." And Clifton said, "We drove through this most delightful mountain village of Agios Dimitrios, a shocking traffic trap. Houses built of dry stone, roofed with local shale slabs, clung to the steep slopes like swallows' nests under the eaves. Every door opened direct onto the narrow winding road. Every door seemed crammed with rosy-cheeked children and the womenfolk, all so thrilled and glad to see us. I thought of our hundreds of three-tonners charging around blind corners and shuddered at the potential slaughter." And as Brian said, my father said, "The drivers did a good job, and I take my hat off to them for their good effort. I'd drive anywhere with Bob last night. Just before we came over, 7 German planes came over and bombed the pass, but did no damage." So we're just about there, I think.
Yeah, there we go.
Interesting. When I'm just going to take a minute, Paul, to talk about this for a moment, because Phil Hammond, my father's mate and good mate, he was a driver, and part of my reason for taking these videos was to go back and show him what it looked like, because he was one of the drivers that drove over this at this time.
Right.
And what I would do is set up the table. He and I would sit next to each other, and I'd have this on full screen on a computer in front of him. And he was just mesmerized by it. And the further up the hill we got, I mean, the whole thing goes for about 20 or 30 minutes. The further up the hill we got, the more and more mesmerized he was. And you could just see him going back. And he started saying, "Hey, Cocky, did you see this?" And Cocky was what my father's nickname was. You know, he was really in the zone. It was
right. Yeah. So you'd
amazing,
become your father for a moment there. Yeah.
amazing experience.
And just while we're talking about the kind of the emotional response to this, when you were on before talking about North Africa, for you visiting there, and you said you're with your daughter as well as your wife this time, was it this experience? I mean, better or worse are the words I'm thinking of, but when you're in North Africa, a lot of the places you were going to, there's nobody there, there's nothing there, it's just rock and sand and heat. But in Greece, obviously, people, cars, people moving about, markets. Was it somehow more of an experience visiting places where there was nothing, or did you find it more emotionally rewarding when there was something, or was it just different?
No, well, I think they were different. I think nothing will ever knock City Rizic off the top of the list as far as I was concerned. But what I got out of this was how emotionally attached a lot of the Kiwis got to Greece. I'm going to move on to that a bit later. And this mountain in particular seemed to mesmerise them. It's just everywhere you read about New Zealand and Greece, it's this Mount Olympus Pass. Some of them called it the Olympus Pass. Some of them called it the Katerini Pass. Aegius Demetrius features and all sorts of stuff. So it's for some reason, as I said, it really got to them. And so to be able to go over it at the same time of the year and see it as they saw it, and even having that truck come up here down the other way, that's why I took the sound off. So it was a bit of a
you get rid of swearing.
But anyhow, so that was a wonderful experience. Where are we at? What's the next one, Paul?
We've got a photo of that, whatever that is on the screen there now.
Yeah, no, so just a little shrine on the side of the road.
Right,
and the next one,
we've got the wartime one.
It's interesting. This is one of Brian's photos. I think I've got it here. And it's interesting on the back of it, it says somewhat presumptuously, on top of Mount Olympus. Well, I know what he means. It wasn't quite. So the next one is actually the top of the pass there. And the next stage is to get down to Allison or Ellisona as it has there. It was getting very hard to work out where they were about now because they were changing position constantly. But this is my father with Bob Nevin. I went to school with his son actually. Anyhow, can we just run the third video, Paul?
Yep, we'll do that.
I hope this is sort of making sense to everyone.
No, people are loving it. Don't worry, it's great.
Well, the difficulty is that at the time they were heading backwards like nobody's business because it must have been a very frustrating thing for them. So this is going from Aegius Demetrius down to Ellisona or Ellison. Today it's cold and wet. It doesn't seem like Good Friday at all. It's raining now and we're lying under our shelters waiting for it to clear. Well, we got the weather right, didn't we? We're right on a plateau overlooking a very fertile valley. Several villages are close by, but most of us are broke, so no visits will be paid. Yesterday, as we retired back, we passed countless refugees who are fleeing from the Hun. People who stayed behind were very downcast at seeing us go back, and the thumbs up that were so conspicuous as we went forward were conspicuous by their absence. So this is Allison. Lovely place. This was a real focus of attention during the war, and you'll have to excuse the storks, but we got, they were quite captivated by the storks actually, and they featured in quite a lot of the men's recollections, the storks on the roofs up there. And there's the monastery up on the hill, which is just coming into view, I think, and that also features a lot in a lot of the narrative of the battles. It was such, and I'll show you another photo of it shortly, but that was such a feature of the thing. So, Paul, I think, we can just flick through these. There's just 2 or 3 photos of Allison. It's the war memorial there in the monastery. Yeah. And so this is the next map, which is really showing because this is where it actually things start hotting up here, and so it's useful to understand it. So Allison at the top, the road goes east and west down there, and that all ends up at Turnabos. But And Dad's platoon, my father's platoon, was actually split in two parts. And I'm from everything I've been able to work out, he was on the side that went to the left there, where it's the top arrow, or where it says 3 machine gun battalion company is there, and there's an artillery battery behind, and that will make sense when you see the rest of it. By now the Germans were on their way down, and so this is on the 8th. We're talking about the 18th of April. They could see the Germans coming down through the pass, and they were being engaged by the artillery. They were a bit too far out of range for the machine gunners, but they were getting close, and getting a lot of bombing from the German Air Force. And later, even on the same day, they got their next orders to make the next, retire down south. So could you go to the first one, Paul? The next photo, sorry.
Yep.
Right. So I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the training of the machine gunners, because it is relevant. Oh gosh, I hope this expert's not listening to this, but you'll shoot me down, no doubt. Anyhow, interestingly enough, my father had their first experience at college, where they had a machine gun unit there. So that's actually the Nelson College boys, and the cadets were a big thing there. And they got a lot of training, a lot of rifle stuff, and the machine gun, and using arms generally. So the next one, Paul, if you don't mind, is with the territorials, who my father joined during the war. And the Nelson unit that he belonged to was actually part of, that formed the machine gun unit for their South Island Regiment. So that's how he ended up as a machine gunner. And that's Dottie, my father's friend, Dottie at the controls was on the back of that one. And the third photo, again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but what struck me when I saw this is at a territorial camp, how similar the terrain was to what they were experiencing in Greece. Yeah. So you had these guys that had done all the hard slog of the route marching and the formal training in Greece, but in Egypt, at Cairo, and out in the Western Desert. But overlaying that was all their growing up in New Zealand on country like this, and their work in the territorials. So they felt really, really at home in this, and that some of them particularly had a really good eye for the land, and could pick positions, could know when to get in and out of trouble and what have you. So that's why I just thought it was useful to throw those.
And it's what I'm thinking while I'm listening to you, that I should probably have Glenn Harper come on at some point and set the Greek campaign into context, because I'm thinking there's kind of a paradoxical nature of this, in that, as you said there, these troops are well trained. They know what they're doing. The terrain is familiar to them. They know how to move their machine guns around, set them up, and yet outside of that, the campaign is one of falling back, and you're wondering whether maybe they were being used correctly, and whether I mean, it's a big rabbit hole that we don't necessarily want to go down, because we're not here to examine command decisions. But there is certainly, so far you can't say that these machine gun troops haven't done anything but what they're supposed to be doing. They're doing their job. There's no error on their part. If there's errors further up, maybe, but they're familiar with the terrain. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, no, really good point. And actually, I was going to use this later, but it's relevant to what you're saying now, because I found a report written after the campaign. Bearing in mind, this is before City Rezique, which is sort of out of sequence, mentally with me, because we've already done there. But actually, the training that they got here must have been of huge value to them. And in fact, there was a report written which said that after the Greek campaign, elements of the unit, which is the machine gun battalion, were widely dispersed by their tasks in Greece, and gained probably the fullest battle experience of any New Zealand unit or detachments. So from their point of view, it was hugely valuable experience, and set them in good stead for the future. So, right, can we just move on? Because I want to put their positions relative to Allison in some perspective. And this is where I found it really interesting, because I knew what was coming up in his diary, but now I could see exactly what they were facing. Where the arrow is in the middle there is the monastery in that pass at Allison. That's where they could see the Germans coming down through that pass, everything was converging down through Allison, basically at that point. Well, not everything, but a big chunk of it. So this is where they could see the Germans coming. And the next one is just taking a sweep round to the east. So you can see that, it's mountains all around the place. So I'll just very quickly, what he's saying here, another cold, bleak day with a little rain. The past few days have been very exciting and interesting, and I don't think I'll ever forget some of the sights I've seen. First of all, we are parked high up on a hill and get a marvellous view of the plateau and surrounding ranges. They're certainly a welcome sight after the sand dunes of Egypt. So just running through the next three, because the next three will tell, this is how I was able to identify really pretty much where my father was. It was on these hills here somewhere. This one and the next one, Paul, if you don't mind, is really one of them. They all mention the goats.
Right.
The goats everywhere with bells on them. They could hear these in the early, especially early in the morning. They could hear the goats around. And the third one were these flowers, right. and these were actually the key for finding where that gun pit was, because we found these fields with the flowers in them, and we didn't see them anywhere else except in this area. So if you go to the next one, can you go to the next one past this? Yeah. If you can see the flowers there in the foreground.
Yeah. See that, folks? Same flowers.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was there were a few hallelujah moments on this trip, Paul, and that was one of them. I saw this and thought, this is it. I found the Holy Grail. Somewhere on this hillside was where my father was. So if you could just go back to the notebook, if you wouldn't mind.
Yep.
Again, the notebook is this one that I was showing you before. These are the machine gun squads. Their teams, I suppose you could say, for this campaign. The one at the top has got Corporal Cox, Winfield, Heaps, Johnson, McNeil, and Nevin. Bob Nevin was the driver. So the other five were the gun team. So if you then go into the photo of them, so that's the gun team. We've got Heaps at the bottom, Johnson, and then McNeil at the top, my father, and Winfield. So who took the photo? It's always the key question, isn't it, with war photos? Who took the photo? Had to be Bob Nevin, because he's the only one there that's not in the photo.
Yeah, or a trained goat, possibly.
Yeah, a trained goat. And I reckon that is a fantastic photo. I think that's Leonardo-esque, the structure of it. Anyhow, that's just me doing a rave.
Yeah, a great photo.
Yeah. So here, as he said, for the past few days, we've had some very exciting days. First of all, we've been dive bombed and then machine gunned. The dive bombing is simply terrific. Stukas are the chief ones to carry out this operation, and the pilots of these planes certainly know their stuff. The other day, a formation of 12 came over, circled around, then came down on a power dive at a very steep angle and bombed the road just below us. That all starts to hang together. Paul, it's a bit of a jigsaw pulling all these things together where we were. And so this is another photo that he had here. And he said, on the back of it, he's written, under shell fire, we were between the explosions and the Huns. In the right-hand corner is an Aussie battery. Well, I can't really work it out. However, the photo, the flowers are there too. And the rock you can see in the foreground is in the rock that was behind the gun pit before.
Yeah.
Anyhow, every day since then, we've seen them. Every day since then, we've seen them giving an artillery battery. This is the Stukas artillery battery Donko. But the lads come up and hurl defiance at the enemy just as soon as their unwelcome visitors have gone. Good luck to them. The same evening, a large flight of bombers passed over the mountains, and we had the pleasure of seeing one crash. Pretty callous, don't you think? But we had to get rid of them somehow. Amazing, if you just sit back and say that, here are these guys. This really was their first action, and boy, were the odds stacked against them. It's just, yeah. So the next photo, again, is one I've culled out of one of the official histories, because again, it's actually the same gun pit, even though it was in the machine gun official history book. Every day since, we have sat on our hill and seen some beautiful dive bombing. Really, I don't think I'll ever forget it. While I was down at HQ collecting mail, 30 large Hun bombers passed over us. It was a great sight, but I'd like to see some of the RAF about. Where the hell are they? Well, you've got to have a lot of sympathy for the RAF, because they didn't have a lot, and what they had wasn't all flash anyhow. So,
and in your photos, the fog that descends over those mountains very, very quickly are not conducive for great air support.
No. So, so they'd got down this far. They'd survived, but they were rapidly being caught up by the Germans. And from here on in, it was really a race back to the evacuation ports. So, and it wasn't long before those orders came. So if you just go to the next one again, in the interest of authenticity, this is my father's notes, which he'd obviously got at a briefing, that their route from here was down through Larissa to Volos, and southeast to Velostonis, and south until Stock. I really love this sort of stuff, Paul. To have an entry like that was written at the time, the maps that were, someone was hastily packing them up and throwing them in the truck as the shells were exploding around them. It makes the hair on your back of your neck. When you've got the photos, you've got the maps, you've got the documentation that goes with it. Huge privilege. Anyhow, it's just me doing another rave. So this was their evacuation route down from Allison through Larissa, Volos, Lamia, and then to Molos. So you can keep moving, Paul, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. We're making good progress. These are just two or three more photos on the way down. And the next,
Yeah,
just
great photos.
showing the terrain that they're going over. This could be New Zealand, I tell you. So they probably felt, assuming they knew where they were, they could be having a feeling very much at home. And that's just to show you we didn't know where we were going, and thank goodness for EU signs.
Yeah.
So this is the Div-Cav map with Lamia in the top left corner down to Molos, so this is where they ended up, just east of Molos, around where that yellow arrow. I used the yellow there because there's so much red. Here. Okay, so Paul, this is one that we took. This is another hallelujah moment coming up, because I was putting this together last weekend, and I had this photo of when we were there. And I think probably we took it because of the flowers on the roadside, because they were really pretty. And I knew it was Lamia. So that's fine. I was going to show this one. And then I was looking back through my father's album. I came across some photos I hadn't seen before. And so on the right-hand side, you can see I've arrowed a monastery up there. If you go to the next photo, it's the same photo that my father had taken, or had, from 66 years ago.
Yeah, and to be clear, you took that without matching that up. That was a random accidental then and now, which is extraordinary.
I said to Robin last Sunday, "Come and have a look at this." I couldn't believe it. He said, I knew I'd had our photo, but I had no idea that I had the same photo, 1941. Amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And taken virtually on the same day of the year.
Yeah. Amazing stuff.
Well, that was here on the back of the next stuff, I tell you. Anyhow, so we're back at Molos, and you can see the right-hand arrow is where the 9 platoon is. We're supporting 26 Battalion. So they had a few issues getting supplies and rationings for a few days too, by the way, which must have been a bit challenging for them. So I'm going to talk about the trip down from Larissa, from Allison, Larissa into Molos, and a bit of time at from what he said in the diary. For the past week or so, we've been hard at it. Since last writing, we've fought another rearguard action and have retired back to Molos, 120 miles from Athens, where we were taking up new positions. In the action, Jerry constantly shelled us for one afternoon, while the Luftwaffe dive-bombed and machine-gunned us to add to our worries. This would not be complete without paying a compliment to a battery of Australian artillery, 25-pounders. Although constantly shelled, they stuck to their guns like heroes until they finally silenced the Hun artillery. Last night we pulled out and had a very hard ride all night. We passed through Larissa while the Hun parachute troops held several buildings, although we didn't know it at the time. We finally arrived at our destination, Molos, completely tired out. Could you do the next one, please,
Yep.
Paul? This was another bit of a hallelujah moment because I wasn't quite sure where I was actually, where we were at Molos. It was quite flat, very hard to determine where we were. And it was only when I got back and looked at this photo in one of the histories showing the reconnaissance plane in the Molos area. And I was able to use those hills in the background as a marker. So if you go to the next photo, that's where the arrow is where the plane was in the previous photo. So it was just one way of validating, yes, this is where, or very close to the area that they were in. Next day they were bombed and machine gunned constantly. They were bombed and very lucky not to have any casualties. 2 bombs. Yeah. So after tea, we'll go down to company headquarters. A number of Messerschmitts, 12 I think, came over and dive machine gunned us for 3/4 of an hour. Luckily, I was near some Bren carriers, and after a very exciting and hectic moments, I finally crawled underneath, and was I pleased. We seem to be hemmed in with artillery, and from our position, I can see we have a very warm little spot for the party. I wish to Christ the bloody RAF would come over and give us some support. That would cheer the boys up no end. There's one good thing about it. That is I have a good slit trench, and when any aircraft come over, I get right on the bottom. I'm not scared of the Hun, but I believe in looking after myself. I haven't had a wash, shave, or clean my teeth for about 3 days now, and I'm feeling hellish dirty. I'll be very pleased to get back and have a thorough clean-up. Now, this photo it's not a contemporary one. It's when he was an instructor later, but I just thought it was a good opportunity to show, what they looked like within an anti-aircraft pose, which is what they were.
No, definitely. And Rich is making the point that the tripod is reversed, so you can get the elevation down, and he's got the bit he's standing in to be lower. And Rich is always banging on about the fact that there's this perceived use of the machine gun. We think of that First World War covering fire across the trenches, kind of horizontal, but of course there's the indirect support fire. We often forget about that role the machine gun battalions were used for, and the anti-aircraft role. So great image for the Vickers weapons geeks, even though that's not actually in Greece. That's a really cool photo.
Yeah, great man. So just continuing with the diary, there's been plenty of artillery fire today, both German and our own. The main thing I want to record is since starting, Jerry's been sending over more planes and been giving us terrific bombings and machine gunnings. Several times today I've put up a silent prayer. A very large formation came over and gave it to us for an hour or more. Immediately afterwards, our guns opened up in great style. Hope to hell they knock the Hun about. Well, it's tough times, Paul. They must have been terrifying, to be honest, because they were just the lack of air cover, which was a source of great discontent for the New Zealand government after this campaign, would be a front of mind for them in future campaigns, and certainly going into Crusader it was.
Yeah.
So So the next one is, you've got it there, photo of Molos. Just on dark, he started shelling Molos from over the bay, which was where you had it before. So when we go out, we'll have to run the gauntlet. And then a couple of photos of the village of Molos. When we pulled out, while waiting there, someone took a pot shot at us and missed. I heard today we're pulling out tonight. Hope it's correct. Yep. Soon after leaving Molos, we had a crash in our truck and made a proper job of it. Luckily, no one was hurt. Still, we got to our destination safely. So 25th of April, Anzac Day. They're getting near Athens by then. They've retreated to within about 25 miles of Athens. And that's when they got their orders that day, and in fact arrived back to the evacuation port, Port Arafti, which is their chosen port during the time. So the diary, 25 April, Anzac Day. This day, 1950, the lads who came before us were getting it in the neck. And 26 years after, history repeats itself, not so very far from Gallipoli. Early this morning, we found the rest of the company. Several of the lads hadn't turned up, but all are known to be safe. We rested up all day and hid in the bush. Jerry didn't find us either, but some of his bombing and machine gunning was uncomfortably close. This evening, we moved to an embarkation point. Luckily, no aeroplanes came near us. Passing through Athens, we didn't know whether we were coming or going. People lined the streets and cheered us on. Very nice after the tough times we've had lately. A couple of Aussies made themselves very welcome. They gave us several bottles of beer and wine and made a welcome change. The Aussies are great chaps, and they treated us to cigarettes, which was very good of them as we were out of them. My father always had huge respect for Aussies for the rest of his life. So the next one, Paul, is the map of Port Arafti, just to point out, just southeast of Athens. We finally pulled in last night, just near the beach. And the next one. Okay, this was at Port Arafti. Today was very easy, and we just lay up in the trees and played cards all day. Had no air raids for a change. Met some Royal Artillery chaps today, and they were great chaps. They shared their rations with us as we had nothing at all. So that's when they got their orders that they had to destroy all their kit at that time, which are highly contentious and they weren't entirely thrilled about. They were allowed to take gun and ammo for AA defence. This is from their company diary. Personnel to retain 1 blanket, ground sheet and 3-day rations. Trucks were to be destroyed by draining oil, smashing radiator with pick and running the engine until seized. Batteries were smashed. Company issued instructions for each man to carry 2 belts of ammunition unless carrying guns. So this next photo, Paul, please, is destroying the gear. As he said, this evening we moved to a small village where we were to leave for the transport. While we were waited there, we were told to throw the rest of our gear away. So now most of us have only got, we stand up and our rifles. And the next, is that the next one? It is an annoyance and a nuisance to think that I've lost everything I had. It is amazing how much stuff seemed to get through despite all that, like his diaries and what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so that now they're down on the beach at Port Arafti. The first company was detailed to be at the starting point. Excitement was evident. This was in the company diary, as we were instructed by the control point officer to jettison packs, blankets and ground sheets. And there were a few scraps, I can tell you. At about 10 p.m, we went aboard a fishing smack and went out to the transport, the Selwyn, a troops ship off the India trade. We had quite a good time on the ship as there weren't too many on board. On arriving aboard, we were treated to a hot cocoa, which was very welcome. Slept anywhere we could and dossed down. We had a good night's sleep. And the next one is really just back at Alexandria. So most of the div went to Crete via or through Suda Bay. Well, they went to Suda Bay. There was no room for the shipping, so 6th Brigade basically went on to Alexandria. As he said, they pulled into Alexandria about 8 o'clock in the morning. The port was absolutely crowded. I think got the photo there. Crowded with shipping with all sorts of good job. The Hun doesn't attack the harbour more often. And then he's sort of winding up to a climax about the campaign. He said, went off the ship about 10 a.m. and we're each given a cup of tea and a parcel of eats. I don't think I've enjoyed anything so much for a long time. Later we went to Amaria, where I think we will stay for a day or two. Very hot, but no dust, thank goodness. So that was the end of the campaign. As Freiberg put it, the ill-fated Greek adventure was over. The grim battle for Crete was about to begin. So, Paul, I've just got a few bits and pieces to follow up, if you don't mind.
Yep.
This is a photo of the platoon after they arrived in Greece, after they arrived back at Helwan. My father's second on the left in the back, and I won't go through all the names. Phil Hammond is the bare-chested one, about 3 down from my father on the right, but I won't go through all the others. And I just want to talk a little bit about casualties, because I think, I always have a respect to that. So the first one, I think, Paul, is Bill Verdon. Have you got the next? Yeah, this was at Bill Verdon's grave at Falleron. Yeah, that was tough actually, because we actually went to Falleron we went from, as I said, we were driven from Tobruk through to Alexandria, and we had a flight 3 o'clock the following morning to go to Athens. So we arrived around at 4 or 5, 6 in the morning. Of course, there was no hotel to go to then, so we decided to get a tram and go down to Falleron, which I wanted to go to, and to go to Bill's funeral to cemetery. So it was pretty emotional, I'd have to say, because we were very tired. It was this beautiful green, surroundings after the desert, and there was Bill's cemetery. And Phil was pretty cut up about Bill Verdon, Phil Hammond, and he asked me to leave a little note for Bill, which he sort of tucked in at the bottom of the headstone.
Yeah.
So he was 28, and what was particularly sad about that was that Bill's elder brother was killed on Crete about 6 weeks later. So the family had lost 2 of their sons within 6 weeks. Not long after the war breaking, the battles breaking out in that part of the world. Pretty sad. I actually had the great privilege of meeting some of his family, a sister and a brother of his, and you always wonder about whether these folk will be remembered by the family. But by gosh, memories were still very raw in the family. So just following on from that, Paul, I think we've just got one from the cemetery. Interestingly, the British were the worst hit in terms of casualties. Out of 21,680, they had mainly POWs, so 6,500 taken prisoner. But the worst hit, relatively, were, and I'd really never heard of this lot, were a contingent of Palestinians and Cypriots, of which, did you know that? There were 4,670 of them, of whom 56 were killed, 25 wounded, and 3,800 were taken prisoner.
No, I didn't know that.
No. So I haven't got a lot more. I won't talk about what the views of the campaign were. I think it was that's pretty well known. It was interesting though, reading Dad's diary. There was Father's diary. Never any hint of disquiet or why we were here or how crazy it was. It was all just very matter of fact. A few complaints about the RAF, but you can understand that. But so you can also understand why the RAF had such difficulty.
Yeah.
He never talked about Greece at all. Never ever did he talk about Greece that I can remember. But certainly in terms of the men, they some of them really did, and I know Phil Hammond felt very proud of what they'd achieved there. So a very strong relationship between New Zealanders and Greeks. In fact, I was talking to my wife just before we were doing this, and she did a tour, or she went through Greece in 1970s or something, and talked there about how the old men in Greece, once they found they were New Zealanders, it was just they were very receptive. So I've got 2 little things, Paul, if you don't mind.
Yes, please do.
The first one, I mentioned that this really got to people a little bit, and I was really taken. Here is just the last few lines of a poem that a New Zealand farmer soldier, infantryman, wrote. I talked about Agrius Demetrius and how that really got at the New Zealanders, this whole Olympus thing. So the last few words of his poem said, "Is Agrius Demetrius still a mountain dream, stalks on the roof and cobbles on the street, white from Olympus, ferrying the pines, where bitter snow in spring a promise meet, time and wild Daphne? Does Katharina wear a soldier's badge, still banded in her hair?" That's coming from a New Zealand soldier, which is not the sort of thing you would actually expect to hear too often from a New Zealand soldier. The other one is just talking about how New Zealanders were received by the Greeks and vice versa. Was in 1954, one of the New Zealand soldiers went back to Port Arafti. He went back to Greece. He actually went back to Belhamit, which is where he'd been captured. but he went to Portarafti, and I'd just like to quote what he had to say. Darkness falls over Portarafti as I enter the drab little wine shop lit by a solitary lantern. The proprietor, short and tubby, regards me sourly and addresses me in German, then presents an amazing change of face when he learns I'm a New Zealander. I buy a steaming bowl of octopus soup, but he makes no charge for a plate of tomatoes sliced in oil and sprinkled with wild thyme, nor for my wine. Then he sends a boy post-haste into the village, and in no time his taverna resounds with the voices of noisy villagers, all offering me drinks and exclaiming, "Bravo!" all delighted that down in the south far Pacific, men remember Portarafti. I become heady with wine and ouzo, and the clamorous Greek voices reverberating in that small room are almost unbearable. I'm relieved to know when a bus is leaving for Athens. The wine of Portarafti is like its hospitality, has been a bit overwhelming, and when I reach Alex's hotel, 2 of his girls help me to my room and put me to bed.
Wow.
I think that just demonstrates that, very strong connection, emotional. I think there was a very strong feeling from the New Zealanders that they were doing and had done the right thing. And despite the military disasters of the thing, I often think that if they were asked to have done the same thing again, they would probably do it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me. I mean, and that's, you said you weren't going to analyze the military campaign, and we can do that another day, perhaps with Glenn Harper or someone like that. But it is interesting that there are fond memories for some of these men of that campaign because of the connections with the locals, because of the fact, we said it earlier, despite the outcome, they were doing their job well. They
Yes.
deployed well. They moved back. They never were routed. It proved that the training had been good. So I can understand mixed reactions, and some of the men you knew talked about it a lot. Your father didn't talk about it, but the main reaction we're getting from the viewers is there more of your father's story you can come back and tell us on a future day? We've done North Africa a bit. I'm sure there's more we can do there. We've done Greece now. Is there more we could do?
Oh well. I mean, the one that I would love to have a crack at might be a bit complicated is Ruwais Ridge number 2 and El Moria Depression, because he had some fairly rude things to say about the British Armoured Brigades. Then I'm afraid.
Oh, we like a bit of negativity about other units when it's justified. That's fine, but no, I mean it's been a great show, and to taking us through this personal journey. I think it reminds us all that you can look at the Greek campaign of one like with Crete, which often gets connected with it in terms of faulty leadership, bad decision making, etc., etc. But at the same time, at the bottom end, it's full of units who are deployed there, who did the best they could under often arduous conditions, and it's not just looking at it from a kind of a tactical blame a point of view. It's always about the point of view of those men who were there, and their experiences may have been something different. And I think that's worth remembering. But well, it's been great talking to you, Peter. So
one other little thing that'll only be a minute. I showed you that list of the men in the notebook with the gun crews. There were 21 on there. I met 4 of those, and I met about another 7 or 8 families of others. So those fellows almost became family, and that's when it started to get. It really is a very personal connection in this. And I don't claim to know all the military stuff. Don't ask me what German units were engaged, but I do know what those men went through, and I've had the great privilege of sitting next to them as they've relived it.
Brilliant. Well, we'll leave it with the fact that if anyone wants to contact you, they can do so through your website. It's in the description below. Rich from the Vickers Association may follow you up about some things, or send you some photos, or ask for your photos, or send you some more he has. That'll be interesting. And we will sit back and wait for whether you can consider coming back and talking about other part of your father's story. But for today, it's been fantastic.
I'm very grateful for the feedback, and as I said, it's a real pleasure and a privilege to be able to share the story.
Well, it's an honour for us to listen. So, well, there you are, folks. I will see you all again tomorrow. Later in the day, folks, with Ellen Hampton, talk about doctors in France, the efforts by the French underground to treat French resistance workers, even in the occupation. That'll be really cool. And everybody else, thank you for your comments, thank you for your questions, and I will see you all next time. It's Paul Woodhouse for World War II TV saying enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Paul.